Story 1. A handwritten letter from Winston Churchill calling my great-great-grandfather a fool is framed and hung prominently in my grandmother's house. Story 2. My grandmother has these hand-woven tea towels that her grandmother made for her to bring to Australia from Italy for her hope chest for when she eventually got married. They were supposed to be sheets, but they were too thick, so she cut them and made tea towels. These are the best tea towels on the planet. They are so absorbent and have lasted 80 years. She has given a few away over the years, but still has quite a stash. The family often playfully argues over who gets these. My grandfather also made several kitchen knives out of steel he recycled from work. They are the best knives ever made and are also hotly contested items. Story 3. When my uncles were kids, they blew up wine bottles with black powder for fun. The Coast Guard caught them, and my uncle hid a live explosive under his shirt. He survived with scars and is doing well in life now as the CEO and major shareholder of a large corporation. The tattered shirt has been framed and is probably the centerpiece of our family folklore. Story 4. Unfortunately, my family was robbed of everything of value by a live-in nurse. She didn't even leave our pictures. All I have are memories, but nobody can take those from me. Every once in a while, a new memory will creep into my thoughts, and I just smile. I know this wasn't what you expected in an answer, but I felt the need to share. Thank you for understanding. Story 5. I inherited my great-grandmother's gold bracelet. Her father had it made and engraved with her monogram, giving it to her on her wedding day in 1881. My grandmother gifted me the hope chest made for her by her father. I also have the quilt she made for my 18th birthday. My grandfather gave me one of the hunting knives he crafted while he was still hunting, around 1920. It features a hand-carved deer antler handle and sheath. Story 6. 1827 charcoal and pastel portrait of a young woman believed to be the granddaughter of St. George Tucker. Story 7. A handful of acreage, 10 acres or less, was deeded to my grandmother's lineage before the United States and North Carolina existed. It is situated at the back of a much larger parcel of timberland, over a creek and just out of reach for anyone harvesting timber. All old growth and hollowed-out hardwoods, while the other side consists entirely of hybrid pine. I have walked it. It is beautiful. Covet it. I have outright begged for it. This land accounts for less than 3% of the property my father inherited, and I would give up nearly everything else from my inheritance for those few acres and the right to access it. Story 8. Probably my grandma's Type 1 Levi jacket that is in perfect condition. She didn't even realize it was her camping jacket. When she passed away, I inherited it because it suits my style more than anyone else's. When I found out its value could be upwards of $12,000, I decided not to wear it. Story 9. My grandfather has a whole collection of items about Expo 85, which pertains to Belgian history from that period. I do not know exactly what it all is, but it is extensive. He has been working on it almost every day for over a decade and is still going strong. Story 10. One of these tablets, I think it's 6 to 10. A family member used to work for Paramount as a machinist and builder. Story 11. We have an old cedar chest from around 1889 that my great-grandfather used when he came to the United States from Denmark. Story 12. A large crucifix with a brass figure of Jesus and a solid wood family guardian from Germany has been in the family since at least the 1700s. My grandmother had to return to Germany after the Berlin Wall came down to retrieve it from her parents. What makes them interesting is that Jesus constantly falls off, always landing perfectly on someone's head, causing more than one hospital trip over the generations. Remarkably, it is always the men in the family, regardless of where Jesus is positioned on the wall. The wooden family guardian has a fascinating backstory. It must be passed down to a female blood relative. If anyone else possesses it, or if the current family member does not have it displayed at an altar, they are said to experience constant bad luck. Currently, my mother has it, even though she is not supposed to, and she is experiencing ongoing misfortune. My husband refuses to allow it inside our home because it creeps him out. Story 13. I have the trunks that my great-great-grandmother and my great-grandmother used when they came from West Virginia to Washington in 1860. Story 14. I have a large 3 by 5 ornate 100-year-old mirror that hung in the house where I grew up. My nephew calls it the mirror that steals the souls of small children. Story 15. I really wish we could send pictures. It's a clothing hanger that has a fun crochet design on it. My grandmother on my dad's side knitted it. I never got to meet her, but they were giving things away at a family reunion, and 16-year-old me just kind of took it. I'm 20 now, and it's still hanging in my closet. Story 16. A little red pedal car that my grandpa originally built for me has been passed down a few times as family members had children and currently belongs to one of my cousins. It is still around over 3 decades later and works just fine. Story 17. My grandmother's great-grandmother's jade earrings from Imperial China have been destroyed by my mother, but that's a whole different story. Story 18. Definitely not as impressive as most of the things here, but priceless to me. A round saw blade that my parents had painted for my grandparents on my mother's side when I was very little. It hung in their kitchen and dining room until they passed away. It was the only thing I wanted when they died, and at the auction I got it. I also obtained the saw blade they had painted for my other grandparents and the one they had painted for themselves. Additionally, I inherited the bed frame as I got a new mattress that my great-grandparents bought in 1912. It was passed down to my grandparents and then to an uncle who gave it to me. Story 19. Big mink coats from the 1800s. I think my great-great-grandparents immigrated here from Eastern Europe in them. Story 20. I have a copy of the boarding pass from the ship my great-grandparents traveled on when they came to Canada in the early 1900s. It was White Star Line, the same shipping line that owned the Titanic. I can't recall the ship's name, though. Story 21. The property where my dad grew up and my cousins now live was granted to our ancestor by George Washington himself as payment for service in the Revolutionary War. Unfortunately, the deed with his signature was destroyed in a courthouse flood. Story 22. We have original photos of the 1893 World's Fair in Chicago that my great-great-great-grandfather took. They are stored in a box that my grandfather has. I am sure some museum curator experiences excitement whenever we go through the photos. Story 23. Not me, but another person I know. His family valued a cow skull. The story goes that my great-grandfather had a cow that strayed into the neighbor's field. The neighbor was large, while my great-grandfather was not. The neighbor refused to return the cow, claiming it was now his, and the only way my great-grandfather could get it back was to fight him for it. Story 24. My cousin and I have paintings that my great-grandmother painted in the early 1900s while she was studying art in New York. Mine is approximately 4 feet wide by 6 feet high, unmatted but framed, and hers is 3 feet wide by 4 feet high. Mine is a study of a biblical-era woman at a well, and my cousin's is a Madonna and Child. Gaga actually had talent, at least to my untrained eye. Monetary value? Probably none. They are priceless to us, though. Story 25. A relative was a small-scale moonshiner during Prohibition. It was saved from the scrap heap, the brass polished, and it is displayed in a home. Story 26. My nephew has my dad's suit. My dad had it custom-made when he was young. It was bright blue, and he wore it on any occasion that required a suit. My mom hated it, and it was a bit of a running joke. My brother inherited it and wore it, then passed it to his son, who has also worn it. They all look identical, so the pictures are pretty awesome. Story 27. A Civil War-era hardtack biscuit. Both sides of my family fought in the Civil War on opposite sides, but I have almost all of my great-great-grandfather's belongings. The beautiful etched lithograph print of his discharge certificate is remarkable, and I am saving up to have it professionally matted, framed, and preserved. Story 28. Unfortunately, there was a house fire in 2003 that not only took the life of my great-grandmother, but also destroyed many antiques and belongings that would have been heirlooms to pass on. My grandmother and I live together, as she is my great-grandmother's daughter. Together, we hold on to what made it out of the fire or what other family members had given us for safekeeping. A single storage tote full of soot-stained photos ranging from the late 1800s to today, including some letters, genealogical research, a family tree book, and old birthday cards. A string of pearls belonging to my great-grandmother from when she was in high school during the 1930s. This is my personally inherited heirloom, something I treasure and only bring out for special occasions. A rocking chair that belonged to my great-great-grandmother, who passed away the year I was born at 103 years old. A circular stained glass window from my grandmother's house, where she lived as a small child in the late 1940s. A few cookbooks, now falling apart from use, that belonged to my great-grandmother, filled with her handwritten notes and dates she tried recipes, often with comments like, "Everyone enjoyed this." A Christmas apron that my great-grandmother sewed, featuring a hand-painted bundle of holly on the front created by my grandmother. It's not much, but we treasure these few things we have left. Story 29. I am not aware of my family having any heirlooms. Given how my family is, if they had one, they would not tell me. This means I only have what remains of my memories regarding anything related to my family. Story 30. We have a small two-seater church pew from my partner's family, along with one of the little kneeling stools that originally accompanied it. It is a solid piece of furniture that will definitely last long past our time. Story 31. My dad has an old hardcover Sears Roebuck catalog. I'm not sure of the exact year, but I think it's from the early 1900s. I've never seen a hardcover version, so it's interesting to bring out once in a while. He also brought back a shell casing from Vietnam. While it may not be particularly special, I have always thought it was interesting. Story 32. My grandfather had a friend who owned a farm in the 1950s. Having taught history at Oxford, his friend thought him the perfect person to gift a Bronze Age flint axehead that he found in one of his fields. This piece is a beautiful dark green and is in such good condition that it was almost certainly a trading piece rather than something that had been used. My father has it now, and I will soon own it myself. I plan to donate it to a museum, as it definitely belongs there. Story 33. My grandfather owned two clocks signed by Napoleon Bonaparte. If I remember correctly, my mother has one, and one of my uncles has the other. I have begun collecting precious items during my travels to pass down to future generations, such as hand-woven kimonos, antique musical instruments, cut gems, ritual items from various religions, and fine rare books. Story 34. My great-grandfather's 1912 license to pilot steam vessels on the Mississippi River. I wish I could show it to John Hartford. Story 35. In 1975, a woman in her 80s left my father a collection of glass bottles filled with various medicinal powders that her father used when he was a doctor. Story 36. My father gave me the P-38 pistol he picked up during the Normandy invasion at Omaha Beach for my 21st birthday. He was the only person in his landing craft to survive and carried it throughout the war. I also have the Alpina watch my father bought in Switzerland when he was a military police officer at the Nuremberg trials. He wore it every day after that until his death. Story 37. My great-grandmother was a writer, poet, and artist. We have her books and a few of her paintings from the early 1900s. Story 38. My great-grandfather emigrated from Nazi Germany and served in the army. My aunt is the current custodian of his Colt M1911, which still has the sweetheart grips featuring my great-grandmother and grandfather's oldest brother. Unfortunately, I don't think I will ever get the gun because my aunt seems to have an issue with the rest of the family and took it from my grandfather when he was in a vulnerable state before he passed away. Story 39. Somewhere in Ireland, we have the once jewel-encrusted Bible cover that graced an Irish Bible from the 7th century. My Irish ancestors were responsible for hiding the church goods when Vikings came calling. In other words, they were the ones who grabbed the loot and ran to hide it somewhere. This evolved into a position of privilege. Eventually, the honor of guarding the Bible led to a family feud that was ultimately resolved by one of my great-grandfathers, who threw the Bible into a fire, reasoning that no one could argue about it if it was destroyed. Clever move, right? After that, my ancestors were the keepers of the jeweled Bible cover until sometime in the 19th century when one of them sold the jewels. It frustrates me to think that one of my ancestors sold his family jewels. I never thought of it like that until just now. Story 40. A Model T. My grandmother was a bit of a hoarder, so until a couple of years ago, we didn't even know it was in the fourth garage, covered in things. After she died, my grandfather started donating and getting rid of items, and now the car is mostly uncovered. Story 41. We have a full-size Philadelphia street sign of a very well-known street that shares the same name as my family name. A friend of my dad borrowed it from its legal location and gave it to him. Story 42. My great-grandfather's double snake-headed golden ring has been passed down for a long time, and it still looks quite good for its age. Story 43. My uncle gave me 2 buckets filled with items belonging to my grandfather from before and during World War II. They contained a National Socialist belt, pieces of shrapnel, bullets, military documents, love letters, and a folded napkin with a red curl tucked inside. Story 44. My 3 times great-grandfather's Civil War dress sword. He fought in Sherman's army from Chattanooga through Georgia and the March to the Sea. Story 45. The one I currently have is our pre-US Civil War era rocking chair. I can't remember which of my cousins has a trunk that came over on the Mayflower. My absolute favorite item we have, however, is a copy of the court order banishing my great-grandfather from Plymouth for being ungodly. I asked what he did, and my grandfather shrugged and said, "Probably tried to dance." Story 46. Not an heirloom, but my older sister died at age 6 before I was born, and my parents had a framed portrait of her. When my mother died in 2023, I was surprised that no one wanted her large portrait, so I removed it from its frame, detached it from its mat, and put it in a smaller frame. Still, no one wanted it, so I gratefully took it and proudly hung it in my home. If there was a fire, it's one of the things I would try to rescue first. Story 47. We still have 2 trunks that my great-great-grandparents brought with them when they emigrated from Norway to North Dakota. 14 years later, they moved to Canada by horse and cart. Story 48. Not cool, but we have been passing crippling depression down the line for nearly a millennium at this point, I believe. Story 49. My family has a hand-carved eagle that was placed on top of a flagpole. It was carried into battle during the Civil War. At least that's the story. My dad is too afraid to have it authenticated for fear it would ruin the family's oral tradition. Maybe one day when I inherit it, I will have it authenticated. But who knows, when the time comes, I may not want to either. Story 50. A document signed by President James Buchanan is in my possession, along with my great-great-uncle's 6-string banjo. The closest date I have found for its make and serial number is around 1885. Story 51. Picture frames made from the ends of 2 propellers from the RE-8 airplane my grandfather crashed shortly after taking off in France during World War I. His diary notes that he managed to miss a nice soft hay pile and instead ended up in a manure pile. Story 52. I have the pass that my great-great-great-great-grandfather was given to travel from Illinois to Tennessee after the Civil War. He had been a prisoner of war. Spoiler, he was on the wrong side. Story 53. A carpeted cable spool, wrapped in glorious purple shag carpeting from the 1960s that my wife calls the biohazard. Story 54. My parents have a large dictionary and an old Bible that were brought over from Norway in the 1810s. I can't read a word of them, but they are pretty neat. They also have a collection of first edition Mark Twain books, though not the super famous ones. Story 55. I have an original group of 7 painting by A.J. Casson that my mother purchased for $100 from the Edmonton Art Gallery in the 1950s through a rent-to-own program. Story 56. A few official Star Wars items say Revenge of the Jedi on them, including a shirt for a toddler. My uncle worked for Lucasfilm. Story 57. If I remember correctly, my great-aunt has a set of National Broadcasting Company chimes from the 1920s, possibly the early 1930s, when her father, my great-grandfather, was president of the National Broadcasting Company. Although it may not be the coolest item, I also have a poster for the 1933 World's Fair in Chicago that my great-grandfather oversaw. It is truly interesting. Story 58. My grandfather had a signed Patrick Roy card, which is amazing for any hockey fan. My dad inherited it, but his house burned down along with the card. Story 59. An apricot tree was either planted by my great-great-grandfather or was already there when he bought the land. Produces the most delicious apricots I have ever tasted, sweet beyond belief. Every year we make a large batch of jam, and I have never tasted anything as good. Story 60. My older sister currently owns this, but my dad, back in the late 1970s and early 1980s, was working in Indonesia for an oil and gas company as one of the head engineers on certain projects. Because my dad was living in Bali for over a year, he went out of his way to learn Indonesian so he could communicate effectively with the workers. One worker who spoke the best English invited my dad one day to his small village just outside the work area, which had mud huts. The worker gave my dad a blow dart and spear combo with poison-tipped bamboo darts as a token of thanks. The reason for this gift was that my dad was the only Westerner who spoke the language and took the time to listen to the Indonesian workers. In summary, my dad received a blow dart and spear combo weapon with bamboo darts as thanks for being kind and learning a challenging language. Now my older sister owns it. Story 61. I have a German army officer's pistol that my dad brought home after World War II. Everyone in the family wants it. Story 62. My sister had the family Bible. Aside from the Bible, it contains the births and deaths of my father's side of the family recorded in it, going back about 200 years. Story 63. Nikko 12 by 60-45-degree binoculars that were used for anti-aircraft spotting during World War II on a Japanese destroyer. My grandfather bought them when he was stationed in Japan during the post-war occupation. My dad used them to show us the stars and inspired a love of space. We had them professionally restored as a gift for him. My favorite is the Stanley hammer that my great-grandfather bought. The handle is dinged up but solid. It's a bit of a superstition, but it feels like I'm least likely to bash my thumb when using it. Story 64. My great-grandfather and his brother, as well as their cousin, all fought in World War I. The one who survived the Western Front brought home a few souvenirs. While none of them were related to war crimes, the best one, which belongs to me, is the dinner bell. He took a spent artillery casing, flared out the neck, placed a pip over where the primer was, and created a stand from a sheet of brass he hammered out, with a rod going through the inside so the casing points downward. The hammer is made from a .303 casing as the handle with another brass rod in it, and a piece of wood from Ypres for the part that you hit. Story 65. My grandma's real crystal ball from the 1930s. She used to dress up like a gypsy at the local seniors club. Everyone in town believed she was authentic. Story 66. Not really a heirloom, but a set of bowls, plates, and bowl covers from Taiwan before they gained independence from China, as well as allegedly a letter from Barack Obama welcoming me and my twin brother into the world as mixed children. Story 67. I have a shotgun that my great-great-grandfather brought with him when he emigrated to the United States from London. I still have the original case and reloading cleaning equipment, complete with a bottle of half-used gun oil from the 1880s. I also have 2 Japanese swords that my grandfather brought back from Saipan. Story 68. I have a bottle of camphorphenique that expired in my grandparents' medicine chest way back in 1984. One day I will pass it on to my own kids. It still smells good. Story 69. My grandparents had a rocking chair that belonged to the founder of their university. I believe one of their grandparents had been his lawyer, which is how the chair ended up in the family. We donated it to the university when we needed to clean out their home. Story 70. There's not really anything left in our family. When my grandparents on my mother's side passed away, their property was liquidated, and we all received our share of the inheritance. Money only, no keepsakes. My dad never knew his father, and his grandmother passed away when he was a teenager. They were very poor, so the only thing he has from her is an old Bible with photos of him, his sisters, and his mother tucked into the pages. There is also very old Canadian currency she used as bookmarks. It's really more about the things inside it than the Bible itself that mean a lot. Story 71. We have a very old lamp used by my great-grandfather. It was used in the mines near Newcastle upon Tyne. It now sits next to an equally old photo of him. They are both around 100 years old. Story 72. A collection of antique Chinese ivory rats. I appreciate them for their intricate details, including their small features. Story 73. Nothing, because my family are a group of greedy individuals from rural areas that only excel in 2 things: racism and poor hygiene. Story 74. Nothing of any value, other than to us of course, but I will give you two examples. 1. My Nana's ironing board. During World War II, my granddad, a farmer, was in a reserved occupation but served in the Home Guard. Later in the war, he had German prisoners of war working on his farm. He said they were extremely hard workers and good men caught in a bad situation. As a wedding gift, one of them built an ironing board. She used it her entire married life, and after she passed away, my mum inherited it, and it is still being used to this day. A letter my other granddad wrote, signed by Gracie Fields. He served in Burma and didn't like to talk about the things he saw and did. I strongly suspect he had post-traumatic stress disorder, but he died when I was very young. Shortly after the war, he was tasked with driving officers around. One week, Gracie Fields and Monty Banks were performing for the troops, and he was designated as their chauffeur. He asked her for her autograph because his sister was a huge fan. This letter also contains his only thoughts, as far as I know, that he put to paper about his wartime experiences, most of which were complaints about the awful mess Rangoon was left in and the terrible rations. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.